Welcome to the Seattle Overload podcast, where we're continuing our guest preview series. It's week 2. Forget what happened in week 1, although that it may be slightly relevant. And to preview the Seahawks game versus the Detroit Lions, I'm joined by the perfect person to preview this. Sports Info Solutions R&D analyst Bryce Rossler. He has eviscerating sharpness on Twitter at BT Rossler, always an entertaining follow, but more importantly, top lad, good friend, a much better Overwatch player than me, although that isn't hard. And even more important, a huge Detroit Lions fan, Bryce.
You got most of it right until the very last bit. I follow the Lions, yes. Would not consider myself a huge fan.
That's right, because in your bio it says Reformed Homer.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the reformation. Obviously, the Lions are the complete opposite of the Seattle Seahawks right now. They went into Kansas City, they beat the Super Bowl champion, whereas the Seahawks, after their second half meltdown, the vibes are incredibly bad. But on the flip side, Bryce, is that the biggest win in Detroit history?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, they've won playoff games before I was born, so those are bigger wins. I mean, I think anytime you beat Patrick Mahomes, you're definitely happy about it. I think people shouldn't jump the gun on hyping the Lions because they didn't have Chris Jones, they didn't have Travis Kelce. The receivers had an absolute meltdown. A lot of stuff went right for the Lions to win that game. Again, anytime you beat Patrick Mahomes, you take it. But I don't think that game should be a referendum necessarily on the Lions or the Chiefs, considering the circumstances.
Yeah, that was a really weird game, and no Kelce obviously helps. I was surprised at the continued drops. It was the perfect storm, right? But you'll take a win as a big Lions fan. So on that subject, for those who don't know, Bryce likes caffeine, enjoys caffeine. So do I. And so does Dan Campbell. So we're basically the same person. Would you run through a wall for Dan Campbell? And more importantly, more analytically, I mean, he's done a great job, right, for Detroit, or do you disagree?
No, I agree. I mean, if I was physically capable of running through a wall for Dan Campbell and he asked me to, I would. I know he got made fun of a lot for the biting the kneecaps stuff in his introductory podcast, and he seems like kind of a meathead, but he comes across as somebody who's genuine and he gets it, and it seems that he connects really well with his players, and I think his players also probably appreciate his faith in them, like with the fourth down aggression and stuff like that. He came on board when the franchise was not in a great spot, and he's been in it to win it the whole time he's been there. So I really like Dan Campbell. I can't say enough good things about him. I hope he's the coach there for a long time, because the Matt Patricia days were not something I want to go back to. So when you have a coach who cares about his players and does everything he can to put them in positions to succeed, you want him to stick around.
Absolutely. Yeah, and obviously Seattle, the beneficiaries of Matt Patricia with acquiring Quandre Diggs for so cheap and then getting quality starting free safety play out of him for so many years when it just seemed like an absolute mess. And the authenticity of Campbell just shines through. It's a kind of weird press conference, but he has his team playing like they're going to bite kneecaps. And we'll talk about how physical this defense is, and just on the offensive side as well, physicality. And ultimately, you can say all these things in the press conference, and it can seem a bit weird, but he's kind of proving it with the results so far. Okay, so while you're high on the head coach, there's a certain few factors with Detroit which is less impressive. You described in the SIS Off the Charts podcast, which is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, hosted by Matt Manacharian, who's also at Sports Info Solutions, and like Bryce is a really top guy, really good guy. and it's an excellent podcast. You described that the over 9.5 line for Lions wins on the 2023 season was a very risky proposition. That was obviously a preseason podcast, but why did you say that?
I think it comes down to two things for me. The first is that I am not a big believer in Jared Goff, just full stop. I know that he's been very productive for them the past 18 games and counting. Has gone really long without throwing an interception. I get that. I also think we've done this song and dance with Jared Goff before when he was with the Rams, where quality supporting cast and a good offensive coordinator have enabled him to succeed. I mean, he's fine. He's a win-with guy. I don't think he elevates the team in a way, in any way. And when everything is like perfect and it's 7-on-7, he looks as good as any starter in the league, pretty much. But when things break down, when there's pressure, when he has to create, when he has to throw into tight windows, I think all that stuff is a bit lacking. And I'm somebody that is big on like betting on quarterbacks, essentially. So it's always hard for me to bank on double-digit wins for a team with a subpar quarterback, unless it's a situation like San Francisco where the quarterback's subpar, but the play caller is a genius, and every other position on the roster is absolutely loaded. And that's not the case with Detroit. The offensive line is good. I like their skill position guys. The defense is, I think, iffy. So part of it is probably some PTSD from being a Lions fan for so many years that I'm like, I don't think they can get double-digit wins, especially because they do have a pretty easy schedule. But Goff gives me pause, and the defense gives me pause.
Yeah, I mean, that's understandable. And I know Seahawks fans who watched Goff with the Rams for so many years and watched those brilliant circumstances around him. Like you said, it is very much you win with him. But because of, it's very, very rare that he elevates a team. And we saw that in week 1, didn't we? Where that was right by the skin of the teeth that they won that game. And ultimately, Goff was a problem. And it was reflected by how Ben Johnson, I want to talk about both play callers later, but how Ben Johnson called plays for him in certain situations, and then Goff's misses and all of his throws being in that classic 15-yard kind of window, peppering over the middle of the field. Jared Goff is still Jared Goff, and Seattle's had up and down success against him, but ultimately I think that they'll come into more problems if their pass rush remains as stagnant as it was in week 1. But as soon as they can move Goff off the spot, and if they're able to maintain their run defense, which again, that's a question mark with how talented Detroit is up front, they should cause problems for Jared Goff. So that's understandable that you described that as a very risky proposition. I think I agree with you, although as a Lions fan, you might be able to believe it could all come together.
It could. I'll never put faith in this team.
Yeah. And I know, Bryce, you love soccer and all things British. As a Newcastle United fan, I can empathise with, doomed or pained NFL franchises. So
I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
No, it's fine. It's just a thing, just a minor thing. Ben Johnson, that's the offensive coordinator, and I think, like league-wide, his reputation seems to be increasing and increasing. He seems to do really cool stuff. Like they're quite siloed from my perspective, where they are, there's a very distinct kind of drop-back element to them, then a very distinct, okay, now we're in our under-center packages and we're going to run the football, which I guess is kind of McVay-y. Like, do you agree with the hype for Ben Johnson before we kind of delve into the offensive scheme?
Yeah, I like Ben Johnson. I think the archetype for like up and coming offensive play callers now is there's supposed to be like this like pristine boy genius guy who is designing crazy plays. I don't think Ben Johnson's that. I think I think the run game design is really good, and I think he's very good at playing to his player strengths. Um, he's good at getting his best players the ball. He accommodates Jared Goff in terms of what they do in the drop back game, which is like very cliched. Every coach is like, we're gonna let the players play, and we're gonna put our best guys on the field, and we're gonna get our playmakers the ball and all that shit. But Ben Johnson actually does it, and I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, that's what strikes me as well. Is the best players get the plays, and he kind of calls the hits, and they're the hits for a reason. Now, Seattle's run defense has been massively improved, although it's a week one sample and they couldn't stop anything to do with the pass. So how much that's actually real from a 2.2 yards per carry against the Rams is to be determined, especially when the Rams are, they were 11 personnel heavy in that game. They're, running wide zone, they're sprinkling in a bit more gap concepts, but not like massively so. But when it comes to Detroit, that's going to be a heavy personnel run game with, 22 personnel, 21 personnel, kind of two back looks, right? So, I mean, I don't know how much you've watched Seattle, but are you confident that Detroit is going to be able to run the football more successfully than 2.2 yards per carry?
Yeah, but that's a really low bar. I think,
yeah,
like you said, Detroit will get into heavy personnel stuff, but they'll mix it up. Like they'll run gun power, they'll run buck sweep. They'll do all sorts of stuff. They obviously, like you said, under center they are run heavier, but I think they in general do a very good job of being able to get into all the different stuff they do, regardless of the personnel grouping or the formation. And in some of the heavier stuff, they are doing a lot of moving parts runs, counter power. They like to get the tight ends moving if it's like split zone or inserting, doing stuff like GY counter and all that crazy stuff. But they definitely can get to what they want to do out of shotgun, out of 11 personnel, especially because they have three linemen who are like exceptional movers, like Frank Ragnow, very good on the move. Penei Sewell, very good on the move. Jonah Jackson, to a lesser extent than those two, but also pretty athletic. So they can get to the moving part stuff out of anything.
Yeah, I mean, I was very impressed with how Seattle, coped with what the Rams were doing, and I think the Rams' offensive line is better than they're perceived from most people. But it's just a whole, and I like their answers. I think they have enough wrinkles up front when they're facing those kind of 11 personnel attacks. It's just, and I appreciate the Lions are going to do that too, as you've said, but it's the heavier stuff, and then the kind of passing game off that, like the play action, the boots, and stuff that Goff can throw and will throw. That makes me nervous, and maybe it's because we haven't seen it. Seeing is believing.
I don't know. Like the Lions play action game is not that complex. Like a lot of what they do from play action, especially under center, is like a deep over route, like a dig or a deep cross and a post, whether it's like guys coming from the same side or coming from opposite sides. They do a lot of that. Their boot game is almost entirely like flood. Jared Goff loves flood, whether it's play action or drop back. I mean, they mix it up sometimes. They'll do like deep curls, but most of it is just like 7-man protection, shot plays, and that's primarily what you're going to get out of them in the play action game.
But that's slightly reassuring. Fingers crossed, but with Seattle, his famous last words. So, in terms of the passing game, though, I did see, and I know that, like how that Goff moved the ball with the Rams, the drop back game has similarities to that period, which is not a surprise, right? And like most of the league is kind of copying how teams stack and then run like a dig with a hitch route in front of it.
Oh,
Or
Detroit loves that stuff.
they
Like
just
Goff loves
spam
throwing
that.
the dig. They'll run drive with the dig and the shallow crosser under it. They'll run it with a curl under it. They'll do it like 3-man with 3 on up the seam and 2 on a curl, 1 on a dig. Goff in general really likes those high lows, whether it's over the middle or outside. Like they spam smash too, in the different variants of it. I think those two are probably like their bread and butter concepts is smash and then some type of middle of the field high low.
Yeah. And
And
from a Seahawks perspective, that is terrifying because against the Rams, McVay put on a clinic of, bunched and stacked receivers. And this is my charting, not Sports Info Solutions, is in case, I don't want to conflate the two. But when Seattle was facing stacked or bunched together receivers, now that could be their, just 2 of them stacked together. That could be their trips bunch, or it could be their motioning into being condensed at the snap. 151 of the Rams' 331 passing yards arrived in those situations, 11 of 24 Stafford's completions, 5 of 11 of the third down conversions, and 4 of the 8 explosive plays came from those stuff. And obviously, as you've just said, those Goff concepts are mainly going to be from those condensed sets. Like I saw, Kansas City give up a few of those in the gun drop back game, right?
yeah, is Seattle mainly getting to like tight bear fronts versus those condensed? No.
No. So Seattle this season, like I've only half charted it, but they were basically 100% 2-4-5 personnel over front. And what they're doing from that, which is cool, is they have like movement answers. The outside backers know when to spike inside and spill the ball to sky safety if it's cover 3. They know when to, how to set an edge when and where their help is. And the same thing is reflected along the front. They also have movements and like fire zones to kind of move the weak point, attack certain run concepts and the play actions off that, the variants off that. So they have a really, really good plan for stopping the run out of that. The problems weren't because they made like schematic concessions versus the pass, to improve their run defense. The problems were mainly on third down. So this is very painful.
Like third downs, like passing downs or like pass run downs?
Yeah, passing downs. 3rd and 4 plus, they were abysmal, like absolutely abysmal. I believe 7 of 11, I think it was, third down conversions. They were 3rd and 4 plus. One of them was a tendency breaking run play against dime personnel, where Bobby Wagner, who we may be able to talk about, he kind of was a bit slow to it, thinking pass. But the rest were the stacked things and destroying man coverage, destroying middle field open zone. Seattle, the way they were playing quarters, having the quarter flat player chase the flat route, opening the dig window with the dig versus an off cover 4 corner because of the stack, and then an off safety who can't really drive on an 8-yard dig if he's a quarter safety. It was terrifying. And so it's a great chance from a positive perspective, from a Seattle perspective, it's a great chance for them to right the wrongs of that game, because I believe Detroit's style generally, well, that's not fair, but Detroit are going to run the ball, right? And if they stop the run, Seattle, how they want to play football is stop the run to then get off the field on third down and stop the pass. And they were unable to do that against the Rams, but they're going to face similar passing concepts in those passing downs. So, again, I am hopeful.
See, that's how they get you. Hope.
Yep, it's the hope that kills you. So, in terms of the Lions' defense, Bryce, I mean, that Kansas City game, I don't know how representative it was, because you're facing Patrick Mahomes. Like schematically, even performance-wise, there's just a lot of things going on there where, I just don't know. Like, they played so much zone, and then it's a hacky broadcast take, literally, but they were saying they expected them to play more man coverage. I mean, is that true?
Expected Detroit play more man coverage?
Yeah.
No, I mean, they don't really have the horses in the secondary to play man a ton. Still. I mean, they're starting Jerry Jacobs. I don't think Detroit's a team that you can. I mean, it's the NFL. Like, we're talking about the best in the world, guys. I mean, for a good chunk of snaps every game, like teams are going to line up and play man and play one-on-one. But relative to the rest of the NFL, I'd expect them to be zone heavier this year just because of their personnel. Um, I just maybe you could expect more man from them against the Chiefs because like the Chiefs receivers aren't great, especially with Kelsey out. But I would think um, with all things being equal, they'd be more zone. Like especially
Yeah.
against Seattle, like uh, Metcalf, Lockett, Smith and Jigba, all those guys are healthy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't.
Lockett left the game with a they wondered if he had a concussion, but he got evaluated and then returned to the game. So yeah, all those guys are healthy, other than Smith and Jigba's dealing with a wrist injury, but he's expected to play.
Yeah, I don't think I don't like Detroit's chances that they want to just line up and play man against those guys for the majority of the steps. I don't think you can do that. Again, it's the NFL. You can't just not play man, but um, they're going to have to um, if they're going to be a good defense this year, they're going to have to play zone and they're going to have to get pressure up front. Um, now, easier said than done, but I think that's probably the recipe for them moving forward.
Yeah, because last year the defense was it had real struggles early, right, and then it
Oh, they were
kind
they were on track to be like a historically bad defense in the
right, and
first
then
half of the
they
year.
kind of recovered to being like bottom 10.
Yeah, they were like close to average the
Right.
last uh, the last half of the season. I'd probably still below average, but they weren't horrible.
Were you surprised that? I mean, I know Dan Campbell is fond of Aaron Glenn, former Pete Carroll first round cornerback, by the way, Aaron Glenn with the New York Jets, but now he's the defensive coordinator. Were you surprised that he survived, or
Not
is it
really,
early?
because again, they kind of turned things around in the second half of the year, and they just they don't have the horses, man. Like, um, it'd be one thing if they were a really talented defense and uh, they just weren't getting it done. I could see him getting clipped, but all things considered, especially with the improvement in the second half, it doesn't surprise me they kept him around.
Yeah. So considering the defensive backs haven't made, I mean, Chauncey Gardner Johnson's a cool pickup, right? Brian Branch, I know safety values are much discussed, exhausted topic. Personally, I feel safeties are, if you're deploying them in a good way, like look at where football's heading or has kind of gone to. Getting a good safety like that, whatever the 40 he ran, is really valuable. But there is a discussion where I'm going with this is there is a discussion over positional value in Detroit, and given the DB room, you mentioned a guy I hadn't heard of before. What was your reaction to General Manager Brad Holmes drafting running back Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round and then linebacker Jack Campbell? Because it sounds like there was some interesting cornerbacks in the first round, wasn't there? And is this part of just being a Dan Campbell team, or is this a Holmes thing as well?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not in the building, so I don't know. I didn't like taking Gibbs where they took him. The Campbell pick also surprised me. Um, Again, not super high value positions. I think with linebacker, I will say the caveat is if you get like a really good guy back there, like Fred Warner or like prime Bobby Wagner, yeah, take one highly in the draft all day. Like you can take one
Mm.
top 10, I don't care. Um, but I didn't think Campbell was that. And the Gibbs thing was I understand what they were going for with Gibbs because like they liked DeAndre Swift's skill set, but he was never 100%. They may not have trusted him too much with ball security, and Gibbs can emulate a lot of that stuff, especially like the choice routes coming out of the backfield, the gadget plays. I mean, you saw them running him on like jet motion versus the Chiefs. and he's a player that can have like 10, 15 touches a game, and you can get a lot of mileage out of that. But where they took him, it's a little rich for my taste.
Yeah, I thought it was cool seeing how Gibbs and also Bijan Robinson were used in, their manufacturing touches for them. And again, it kind of speaks to what you're saying about how Johnson is getting the ball to people and sort of has a plan clearly going in that these guys need to touch the ball so many times, which and then being able to execute that is impressive. I think against Seattle, getting him, if there's a way to get him matched up on Bobby Wagner, and I'm sure there are, then that's the thing to do, and that's going to be a problem thing for them. But yeah, the Campbell thing, like I thought he had some interesting tape. I didn't really like him for Seattle because he had short arms and he, I know he ran a slow 40, but in wider, longer spaces, which Seattle asked their linebackers to do at times, he was just a bit too slow. He just didn't feel like a good fit. But as a downhill, hit guys, take on blockers, get to his gap, like he had all of that. But in the first round, it did feel rich, especially when they have those corners, as you said.
Yeah, and they might have and to your point about like playing against the run, Detroit seems to have a thing for defenders who are good in pursuit and motor to the ball. Like Aiden Hutchinson is like a huge example of this. Like very, very try hard, high motor player. Brian Branch is kind of similar from the secondary. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is similar. Anzalone, for all his flaws, is fairly rangy. And they're good about that. Like they rally to the ball. So maybe there was something about that made them value him more than other teams did. I know there was smoke after the draft that like other teams were going to steal him if Detroit didn't take him. I don't know if that's credible or not because you hear stuff like that every year. But I understand it. I don't agree with it, but I kind of see what they were going for with both those picks.
Yeah. The other thing with Gibbs actually is Seattle, Pete Carroll, obviously he's going to be positive in the lead up to a game, but the way he spoke this week made me think he was the running back that they wanted kind of in the second round, if he'd lasted that long. Obviously they ended up with Zach Charbonnet, but Charbonnet isn't that typical Seattle back. They're always looking to draft a guy who can hit it, especially if it's in top 50 picks. The guy who can hit it, bang, like explosive home run threat, and Gibbs has got that in him. Charbonnet is never really quite going to be that. So,
is Kenneth Walker's healthy, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
He was dealing with a groin injury.
But I don't know. Kenneth Walker's like I think he'll be a top 10 guy in no time. Like I think he's a big play guy. Like, he's not fast, but like the elusiveness.
Yeah, he's their home run hitter. Yeah. I mean, part of his problem is he's always kind of searching that out. Well, that's anecdotal, but he's often looks to be searching out the home run threat, and it led to some really poor inefficiency from him last year. Now, the offensive line is part of that too, but there's times where he's missing blocks, missing the designed direction of the play to try and hunt out the big play, and it doesn't come off. This past game, he didn't follow his pull around, looked like he had a touchdown, tried to cut it back where it's a gap run, you got to hit that front side, tried to cut it back, and ended up with 3 yards when it could have been so much better. But
I think that's a problem for a lot of young backs though. Like coming, I don't know what happened in the Rams game. Like I didn't, full disclosure, I didn't watch the Seahawks Rams tape before I jumped on here, but like first year guys are going from being like one of the best to ever play at their schools, like best athlete on the field, to now you're in the NFL and everybody's a good athlete. You can't get away with some of the stuff you did in college in terms of the creativity and the freelancing. But I think long term Walker will be a good back for you guys.
Yeah. So the scary thing for Seattle heading into this Detroit matchup is both their offensive tackles are currently, well, I don't know their official status, but they're doubtful to play, I would say, given Charles Cross suffered an injury to his big toe, left the game on a cart and on the left side, and I've heard is described as week to week. Like they need to look closer to the game to see how he's doing, to see if he can play, and it's going to be an ongoing thing. Abraham Lucas on the right side also left the game, didn't get carted off, was on the sidelines with his helmet off, but he suffered from a knee soreness that he'd been nursing all the way through. Like at the start of training camp, they kept him limited, and this knee thing is bothering him. And Carroll said how it's preventing him from firing off the line of scrimmage properly. Now, I don't know much about Detroit's pass rushers other than Aiden Hutchinson, which is a guy, okay, he's a first-round pick and a top 5 pick?
He was the second overall pick.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's forced down my throat, though. Like, the announcers...
Oh, the cult of personality is terrible.
Yeah, so...
like his
that,
parents being mic'd up at the game is so weird.
Weird. And even like the pre-draft stuff, I know you had some takes around that as well. How it's just, I don't recall a prospect being this kind of cult of personality, as you said.
Yeah, and I think this has been exacerbated by the fact that he's like the hometown kid. Obviously went to Michigan, grew up in Michigan, so that's a big part of the reason Lions fans love him. I joke about him a lot on Twitter because I like to give Lions fans shit. He's a good player. Like coming out, I don't. Not going to walk anything back. Like I thought 2 was too high for him. I don't think he's going to be like a transcendental pass rusher. Like I don't see him being 15, 16 sacks a year guy. But I mean, he's a solid player. He should be productive for them over the course of his rookie contract, at least I would think. Just not. I thought his testing didn't match his tape. Like I don't think he's particularly bendy, but he's good with his hands, and like I said, just as he is in the run game, like a high motor player. A lot of his production, like the first half of the year, was largely just like try-harding. Like second effort sacks on good coverage plays. He started to get like some legitimate wins down the stretch, which was encouraging. And he looked pretty good against Kansas City too. I know Jawan Taylor is not like Lane Johnson as far as right tackles go, but he looked pretty good against Kansas City. But I don't think he's like a world eater, at least not at this stage. I'd love him to prove me wrong, but we'll see.
But it certainly seems like he'll be an issue if Jake Curhan is out there, even if the broadcast makes it their priority to keep talking about how the offensive tackle isn't lined up with his head down the midriff of the center, right?
The midriff?
Yeah.
I've never heard that. I've never
the waist. Their helmet has
I know I'm familiar with the word, like the definition of the word. I've never heard it in a football context.
Okay.
Not to say it's not a thing. I have no idea what you're talking about.
But the broadcast kept going on about it, and it happens every single NFL game. All tackles do it, and then the moving.
You're talking about when they were like the alignment.
Yeah.
Like how far back? Man,
Yeah.
that shit's so stupid. Because I tweeted this, but the people who are complaining about that kind of stuff and like harp on it would be so upset if they enforced that rule, because quarterbacks would get sacked like 5 times a game. Like NFL pass rushers are like running 4.5s nowadays. Those guys need to be, they need a little bit of buffer. And everybody coaches that way. Like you're essentially going to line up on the hip of the guy to the inside of you, and it's always going to be a little bowed. Like,
yeah, I just couldn't believe. Again, it speaks to the Hutchinson thing, because I don't think if it's any other player, they even talk about that. But because Hutch's parents are mic'd up, suddenly that takes over the broadcast. But
yeah, and Hutch was like the PFF podcast, and Collinsworth is obviously PFF, so maybe that has something to do with it too. I don't know.
In this podcast, we're not affiliated with any data company, but I am a fan of SIS, who obviously Bryce works for. Now,
the one I do want to, while we're talking about pass rushers, the again, I don't think Detroit has like a world eater kind of pass rusher this year, but they have some interesting guys. Um, James Houston, uh, who is exclusively a pass down player. Like you can't they won't play him on par downs, but um, is a very interesting like undersized speed rusher. Had really good production after missing like the first 2/3 of the year last year. Um, he can be a force on pass downs, and then the other two guys that I think are kind of interesting, John Kaminsky, um, who is he's got like a weird body type. He's like 6'5", 280, so he'd probably be more of like an odd front five tech uh, than a true edge guy or like a defensive tackle. But uh, they'll put him along the interior, even on the edge, um, on passing downs, and he's a pretty good athlete, especially for his size. And he can pose some matchup problems. And then Aleem McNeil, uh, he's a nose tackle, so like you're not expecting nose tackles to be like explosive pass rushers. But as far as like a guy who's like, what is he listed at? Like 340? I'm gonna look this up, see what they
He's a
have.
big guy.
He is a big human being. Um, they haven't listed at 315. That's bullshit. He's way bigger
Okay.
than that. Anyway, sorry, am I not supposed to swear on this?
No, you can swear. Do whatever you
Okay,
want.
okay.
You're the VIP.
But I'm not a VIP. He moves really well for his size, and he's pretty quick. Uh, he can give centers some problems if he gets
Yeah,
the opportunity to just line up and go. Um,
well,
but
that'll be a good test for former Detroit Lion Evan Brown as the center.
oh yeah, he is the center, isn't he?
There you go. Uh, the I expect Seattle. I mean, it sounds like they're going to have problems with the. I mean, when you're down to your second string tackles and you're not facing, I mean, the Arizona Cardinals pass rush, you're going to have issues. But those are some interesting names. I imagine Seattle is going to use even more empty than they already do, and to try and compensate for some of that and pick on Alex Anzalone or
You can pick on those linebackers in quick game,
yeah,
for sure. Like if
that's
you
what I
spread it
think.
out empty and like start running like slants or stick at them and make them cover slots or
Right.
even tight ends, like you can get some matchups there.
Although I did pick on Jack Campbell's athleticism earlier, but I remember he did run a 6.74 seconds 3 cone, which is pretty impressive at 249 pounds.
I don't believe in 3 cone times anymore, man. Like the there's something with these athletic trainers where all these guys, you watch their tape and they look like average NFL athletes, like which is still like
He
really athletic, but like
redirected all right on that pass breakup he had against the
that was
Chiefs.
okay. That was good. That was good.
Yep.
But you didn't see a lot of that on his college film.
No, that it was a 3 cone, one of those where it makes you rewatch and you're like, interesting. And yeah, speaks to those athletic trainers. Okay. What's your perception of the Seahawks from someone who's not a maniac like Griff and I, someone who doesn't delve into the real nitty gritty or really care about Seattle? What is your perception of them, and how has Week 1 changed it at all?
Like I said, I didn't watch the film and see what happened in the Rams game. I didn't think the Rams were going to be very good this year, so I
Same.
think losing to them like they did, like just looking at like the scoreboard, is a little disheartening. But I think there's stuff to like about them, especially if Geno continues playing like he did last year. Tyler Lockett's getting older, but he's nice. DK Metcalf, somewhat limited in certain areas, but when it comes to like running down the field and running away from people on crossers, like very good at that. And then I like Smith and Jigba coming out. I really like the tackles. especially because they're so young. I think those guys are ascending players. And why is Tariq Woolen? His name was escaping me for a second. I think he was. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I saw of him last year, he was kind of hit and miss. Like I don't think he's like a lockdown guy yet.
That's fair.
But the movement skills are crazy. The ball skills are really good. So I think he's somebody to get excited about for them. The Bobby Wagner reunion makes me sad because I don't think I don't
Bobby
know.
Wagner,
This is not like the farewell tour that Bobby Wagner deserves. He was like one of the best players in the league, not just at his position, but at any position for such a long time. And
so I mentioned the SIS Off the Charts podcast. I loved in the off season you guys did a Scouts versus Stats series, which was in audio format, but there's also articles of it online. Which how I remembered this. But so the stats guys, the data nerds, Bryce wasn't on that side, but they had Bobby Wagner coming in as their fourth best linebacker. And Bryce and the scouts, it was him and Matt Manacharian, who I mentioned earlier, they pushed back on that heavily. So it's not just Griff and I who watch Bobby Wagner's tape and are like, yeah.
I've got nothing but respect for Bobby Wagner. Like, again, was one of the best players in the league for a very long time. Very much a blueprint for the ideal modern linebacker. It's just that's not what he is anymore, man. Like you watch him to like try to robot a dig nowadays. It's like if you put it up on a side by side, like him trying to like turn around and run and cut a crosser this year versus like even like 4 years ago. It's they totally different player.
Yeah. Well, the Lions are 6 points favorites in this game for a reason. I've seen it as high as 6 points, and part of that is the offensive tackles, and part of that is how Seattle absolutely crapped the bed. I can't pin all of that on Bobby Wagner, but I have to say that last game was, watching the film, it was pretty sad. Even though, again, why data nerds he scores quite highly is because he's not generally asked much to do, and the way that those things are graded usually. And I think there was a much more nuanced, better explained point on that podcast I referenced about this. It just doesn't really translate in a way that
it's really hard to capture coverage performance for linebackers and safeties. Like it's really hard. Corners, it's not necessarily easy either, and I think that sort of bears out in the fact that statistical performance from corners is typically very noisy. So there are definitely areas of opportunity in terms of statistical analysis for evaluating coverage in general, but for linebackers and safeties especially, it's really hard to quantify how those guys impact the passing game. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, Bryce, thank you so much for doing this. Please do check out Bryce on Twitter at BT Rossler. Like I said, he is a very amusing follow, but also there's occasionally some of his day job stuff which leaks out there too. Check out Sports Info Solutions, where Bryce does his work. Bryce, do you have anything else you would like to promote?
No.
Nobody
paid me to promote anything.
There you go. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Please do like and subscribe to the show. Download it. Follow me at Matty F Brown. Comment in the YouTube if you've enjoyed this episode, enjoyed Bryce, and do like the video as well. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day /evening /morning /whatever.